Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's up? Welcome in GC Live Monday episode. Hope everybody had a great July 4th weekend. Trying to get back into a routine here as Chris. Hey, man, believe it or not, I was just looking at the calendar. In like 3 weeks, we'll be talking about actual preseason football. So, luckily for everybody, you know, us included, I think your sort of summer topics are about to kind of end. We all know in this business, you kind of got to dig a little bit deep during the July portion of the year. And that's when everybody kind of gets in their last little break before you really roll into football season. But 3 weeks from now, man, we'll be talking about actual real college football with preseason camp kicking off for South Carolina around that time. So, man, I guess what did I miss last week? Obviously, I took my little week and my reset, and now, hey, it's almost here.
It is almost here. It's crazy, and we were talking about that yesterday with family. I was actually not trying to relate it, Wes, to football season. We were just relating it to school almost starting back. But both of those things are just about here. Preseason camp will be here actually before the start back of school for the kiddos. And it's wild. It's wild to think about. And you're right, July, a little bit of the slower time, but still plenty of stuff to talk about. I don't know if we could say plenty of things happening. There are some things happening that I'm sure we'll hit on here in the world of Gamecocks athletics, but definitely plenty of things to digest with a very important, very highly anticipated Gamecock football season coming up right at the beginning of September and preseason camp kicking off in August. What you missed, not a whole lot in terms of actual happenings. There are obviously some big prospects, Wes, that we continue to cover on the recruiting front. South Carolina is going to have another big prospect event at the end of this month, the cookout event. They've already had one. It was kind of in conjunction with an official visit weekend. So they had some upperclassmen from the 2024 class, and they also had some key underclassmen targets in for that. We'll see another event at the end of July that'll be more of the same. So just tracking that a little bit, and kind of some guys that have become, in a way, maybe a core four of guys that potentially could decide in July, West, on the recruiting front. Jonathan Paylor, Dylan Stewart, Daniel Hill, Keelan Adams. Just continuing to follow that, guys. Adams is probably the one guy where there's been a little bit more movement since you were gone, so I'm sure we'll dive into him. We got SEC Media Days coming up next week. Those representatives have now been announced as far as who South Carolina will send. And a couple other things happening in Gamecocks country too. But I think you picked a pretty decent time to scoot out of here for a little bit.
Yeah, it used to be, man, whenever you would take your vacations, like 5 people would commit.
I know.
It was
I'm sorry.
Uncanny. But yeah, so we're rolling now, man. It's almost here. Before we get any further, though, and like you said, I want to talk a bit about the selections for Media Day and just some, you know, kind of newsy, kind of not newsy type stuff that's going on. And then we're going to dive into starting our preview. We're going to use these next 3 weeks to kind of break down each position, which I think is a good time to kind of reset where things are at each spot now that it appears, you know, transfer portal, you know, incoming and outcoming probably over with. This is probably your roster for this season, unless a guy or two pops up incredibly late. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we are. But first, this is, of course, brought to you by our buddy Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, clint.hammond.com, 803-771-6933. You can read a lot more about Clint, again, at that clint.hammond.com URL. But the short version is, obviously, it has been a choppy housing market the last, I don't know, man, 3 years. There's ups, downs. Interest rates were super low. Now they're super high. But everybody needs a home. So if you are in that market, if you recently got married, if you recently had a big life change, and maybe this is the right time for you, Clint is the guy who is there to sort of help walk you through that process, get you hooked up with a mortgage, let you know what your interest rates might look like, and then sort of give you a chance to look at what your options may be for that. So as always, we appreciate Clint being our presenting sponsor here on GC Live. Chris, SEC Media Days also right around the corner. You know, we'll see if actual information comes out of that. But either way, it signals sort of the unofficial start of the preseason most years. And so South Carolina, I would say, not a big surprise. There were several guys who I think were worthy, I guess you would say, for lack of a better word, of being selected. But of the three who were selected, you can sort of see how they all three make sense. Of course, Spencer Rattler in there. He did not go last year as the new quarterback on campus. He does go this year as South Carolina's returning starter. Tonka Hemingway, we've seen him emerge as I would say, a fixture in the middle of that defense. And then Kai Kroger, who has just really, to be a specialist, man, ingrained himself, I feel like, within the fabric of South Carolina football. So I would say no issues whatsoever with the three that they picked, and you can certainly see why.
They all make a lot of sense for different reasons. I think, was there maybe some mild surprise, Wes, on the national scale that Spencer Rattler didn't go last year? Maybe. But I think it actually made a lot of sense, right? Spencer Rattler was arriving from an interesting situation with how it ended at Oklahoma. He was in his first year. He had not had that chance to establish himself as a team leader, right? What have we heard in the offseason a lot going into this year as opposed to last season about Spencer Rattler? It's about how much more comfortable he is, how he's one of the guys now. When he got in, he took more of an approach of just keep your head down, kind of work. He's taken on, it seems like, from what he said, from what some of his teammates have said, from what the coaching staff has said, a little bit more, or maybe a lot more, of a leadership type role. So I think, honestly, that was Shane Beamer's way last year of kind of just diffusing the situation, kind of taking some pressure off of everyone and just having some other guys going. I mean, we saw Zach Pickens go last year. That made a ton of sense because he was one of the team leaders as well. Now you've got a guy in Rattler who's been in the system, in the program rather, for a year. He's had a chance to establish himself more as a team leader. And Spencer Rattler is a guy that is a hot commodity from a media standpoint, right? A lot of local, regional, national folks are going to want to talk to Spencer Rattler because he's a guy that's been on the radar in terms of media for so long. And now with him, the way they finished last year, him being in his second year, it makes a ton of sense. Hemingway and Kroger, a couple guys who have just done things the right way consistently. They're great producers on special teams and defense, and this gives you a representative from each of those phases, right? So that is another positive mark, I think, and another reason why you do this. But they're just, I think those guys also have, since they got to South Carolina, embodied exactly what Shane Beamer wants his program to be, just unselfish players who are incredibly productive, great teammates. So I think this is a really, really good pick. And I think all the guys that he has selected, that Coach Beamer selected, will be, good quotes, good interviews. We'll see if they have anything, interesting to say. I think they'll have some interesting things to say. Probably nothing super groundbreaking that comes out of media days, but it should definitely be some entertaining interviews and conversations with those folks.
So, Chris, while we were here doing the show, a little bit of breaking news as far as South Carolina athletics go. Jack Mahoney officially off the board in the MLB draft. I guess, first of all, congrats to Jack. And, man, he did well for himself, Chris. I would say he moved pretty far up the boards coming off of, obviously, an injury going into this past season, and then was arguably, maybe not even arguably, was South Carolina's best pitcher, I felt like, down the stretch. And he is selected number 77 overall. That is the third round in the 2023 MLB draft by the Colorado Rockies. So congrats to Jack. Obviously a great pitcher and a great athlete as well. So I think a guy that you could see make that transition. It's very difficult, obviously, at the MLB level. And even if you get drafted, and even if you get drafted high, they're still like, all right, go to some small town and start from the bottom. So I don't really make predictions on MLB prospects, but certainly a good opportunity for Jack. And if you go third round, that's decent money. So congrats to Jack again, bouncing back from that arm injury and putting himself in a position to go get drafted. Pretty awesome. And that news just came down. You can read about that. It's a free story on GamecockCentral.com. Let's see. All right. So SEC Media Days, we knocked that out. Not much more to say there until we actually have that event take place. Let's dive into a couple of little recruiting things, kind of those main guys we've been tracking a little bit, Chris, and then we'll kind of get into our quarterback preview. Again, we're going to use that to sort of frame up these shows over the next few weeks. We'll break down a position each show, maybe a show or two. We'll do two positions just to kind of knock it out, but we'll get into quarterbacks here in a second. Chris, I think the guy you alluded to it, the guy people maybe are most interested in hearing about right now, just because there's kind of been movement, would be Keelan Adams. And, you know, we see a lot of different things in recruiting. You know, we've seen various different ways the recruitment can play out. I don't say we've seen it all, because every time you think you've seen it all, you are reminded that you haven't. This one is very interesting, though, because he took a visit to South Carolina a few months ago, and all of a sudden we were hearing, hey, he's going to end up at South Carolina. And then he was back on campus when camp season kicked off, hanging out with Reno, hanging out with Mazio Bennett, hanging out with the whole crew. It was even more solidified at that point. Strangely enough, before that initial visit, South Carolina was in his group he was listing. But I would say, Chris, not even a guy we were tracking that much as far as us picking up wind on Carolina being in a good spot. Well, then sets OVs to Alabama, Virginia Tech. I kind of thought it was interesting in the back of my mind. Didn't take a South Carolina OV during that stretch where they were hosting all the other guys. But the plan was, he'll take that in the season. So you're kind of saying, all right, well, maybe he commits to South Carolina in July and then uses the OV to get back down here and spend more time around the staff and the guys for a big game or something. Well, now, and Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you because you've been kind of dialed in while I have not. There's been a lot of VT buzz, you would say, coming off of that official visit. Yeah, there's always a process of sorting through that. Is that post-visit just, hey, everybody feels good after a visit? Or is that a real thing that South Carolina fans and coaches should be concerned about? At this point, it appears that this is something South Carolina fans and coaches should be concerned about in terms of a Virginia Tech push.
Yeah, and to piggyback a little bit off your point about how unique this one has been, there was a point where, you know, that was June 2nd that Keelan Adams took an unofficial visit to South Carolina, worked out with Reno and Mazio Bennett, just kind of hung out, and things looked great at that point. And I remember Keelan Adams telling me that it looked like at that point in June, he would not take any official visits because of his parents' work schedule. Well, lo and behold, he's taken a couple now, and obviously things can change. Wasn't trying to, be dishonest or anything. It just shows things change, right? So South Carolina was in good shape, but we knew that at some point he wanted to take an Alabama official visit. And so it was always kind of framed up, Wes, as he'll go take an official to Alabama. They'll bring him in for the official, but it's probably not going to move the needle, that's a strange thing to say, right? Hey, a guy's taking an official to Alabama, you probably don't need to really worry about it. You don't hear that in recruiting, but that was kind of the case here. Out of nowhere, almost, he travels to Virginia Tech, his home state school, for an official visit, and out of that one is when things really started to change here. And so you're right, there is concern now on the part of South Carolina about losing Keelan Adams to the Hokies. They made him a huge priority. South Carolina's prioritized Adams as well, but the Hokies made a giant push here, and it appears to be paying off. In 3 days, I mean, we're live Monday, July 10th. In 3 days, Adams is supposed to announce his commitment. Hokies have picked up a good bit of buzz here. I do think we're going to keep tracking this one up until decision day, Wes. But if you had to peg this one right now, even some people that still felt good about South Carolina's chances that I'm talking to are now going more towards 50-50 at best or Virginia Tech at worst. So I actually, a little bit ago, changed my own 3 RPM pick. Lower confidence, but I went ahead and changed it to Virginia Tech, playing it a little bit conservative with the lower confidence. I do get the sense, though, Wes, let's say we get to the 13th. This one goes against South Carolina. Interesting that he does still have that official visit to Byrne if he wants to take it, if the staff wants to bring him in at some point. And his plan always seemed to be to take an official visit during the season to Columbia, even when things look better for the Gamecocks. So this one may not be done in terms of the twists and turns. We'll just have to see where it goes from here.
And you can sort of see, not that you put all stock into social media happenings, but you'll notice those Carolina commits, they have started locking in on Keelan in the last week or so.
Yep.
And are trying to make their push, trying to sort of potentially, if everything we're hearing behind the scenes is kind of the reality of it, which it appears that it is, they're trying to sort of twist him back towards South Carolina's way. It sort of feels like Virginia Tech may have just said, hey, this is an in-state guy. We got to do everything possible in our power to try to keep this guy from leaving our state. And so far, seems like they've done a good job with that. We'll see where it goes. It can turn back, obviously. And so, Chris, a guy that had a little bit of interesting movement that I don't know if we've talked about quite as much, but it just hit me. We need to hit on him a little bit because there was some news last week, and that would be Jalewis Solomon, who told Chad Simmons August 5th for his final decision. Very, very interesting recruitment at this point, though, because he visits South Carolina officially, right? Names South Carolina his leader. So this is a kid who's naming true public leaders, telling you where things are at any given time. I interviewed him after that visit. Actually, just a really cool kid, man. Great personality, and enjoyed speaking to him. So South Carolina's public leader. But you're going, all right, Florida State, they've got their official visit in a couple weeks. Takes the Florida State official. Lo and behold, FSU takes the lead. They're the leader. Decision on deck. Then news comes out late last week, August 5th for decision. However, within the confines of that, we also find out he is currently scheduled to be in Columbia for that cookout event at the end of July. And this has sort of made me change my thinking on this one a little bit, Chris. If he makes that visit, I think this thing probably twists back in South Carolina's direction. And, you know, I think if I'm Florida State, I'm trying to do everything in my power to keep that visit from happening because, you know, we've seen, Chris, that in my experience, official visits that are locked in, they tend to happen unless a guy commits somewhere else before then. Unofficial visits and, I'm going to be at the cookout, those are a little bit more fluid. So I think this is going to be one of those things where we're going to be sitting there, all right, did Solomon make it in? And then if he does, I think it's a great opportunity for Carolina to flip him back as far as which way that thing's leaning, because it'll come 1 week before he's set to make his decision. And, you know, this is a kid who has had scheduled visits to South Carolina and has followed through on them because he was on the list for August 15th for spring game. He made it to Columbia for that, made it Columbia for his official, obviously, in early June, and then is on the docket again, publicly saying he's going to be back on campus on the 28th. So I don't know, man. This one's going to be fun to track, I think.
Yeah, there's been some back and forth already and could be more. And with him being a South Georgia kid, Florida State has a little bit of a proximity advantage here. And Jalewis Solomon has said he would like to stay close to home, not too close to home. Florida State kind of fits in there. But this isn't someone who's been flaky on the part of South Carolina, right? Out of all his offers, it's really coming down to those two with Florida State and South Carolina. Gamecocks have held the public advantage. He really, really likes Torian Gray. And so that's exactly the way you described it earlier, Wes, is exactly where I am with it. If I'm Florida State, I'm pulling out all the stops. Don't let that trip happen. If I'm South Carolina, you're doing everything you can to try to make that trip happen so that you'll have possibly, presumably, the last bite at the apple before he makes his decision as far as an in-person visit. So, this is a guy, 4-star athlete, can play corner for you. They need another guy, a guy of Jalewis Solomon's caliber in this class. He'd be a great fit, a great pickup. So it'll be an interesting month tracking whether or not that visit's going to happen. If it does, where it goes from there.
You watch this guy's film, man?
Yeah. Dynamic athlete.
Hey, he's a good player. I think a potentially, he's listed as an athlete for a reason, so I'm not like breaking any news to saying he could help on either side. Carolina obviously loves him as a DB, but I think he's big enough and athletic enough that he could be one of these true cornerback types that can match up with bigger wide receivers and can go out there and play and has the fluidity in the hips. And, it's a really solid to good DB class for South Carolina so far. He, for me, is a big, like, all right, does this thing push over into like being a great DB class or sort of stay kind of where it's at? Because I don't know that we have a great feel for exactly how that position is going to pan out over the next couple of months. But Solomon, to me, would kind of start to push that thing over the top, even though officially not a DB as far as how he's ranked and rated, but appears as a DB all the way for South Carolina with as much time as Torian Gray has put into recruiting him. So an intriguing one to pay attention to there. Any of these other guys, Chris, that you want to kind of get into? I mean, obviously we can talk Dylan Stewart at any point and people want to hear what's going on. Doesn't feel like there's a ton of movement at this point. It's South Carolina, Ohio State are pretty much the two battling at the top. Then you kind of have Georgia in there as well. We've said that for some time. Jonathan Paylor, obviously not really a whole lot of movement there. Announcement coming up, expected at the end of the month on July 28th. And, Daniel Hill, it's another one that's kind of in a waiting pattern at this point now that he has, kind of finished up his OVs. It is, I know, Chris, you had a little quick update on him in the insider report.
Yeah, so for Hill, just kind of waiting to see if he's someone that's going to end up making a July decision or not. It's possible that he still does. He actually touched base with them last night, Wes, on July 9th, on Sunday night. And he mentioned that, he's still trying to make the decision. It's been tough. Obviously, Alabama, South Carolina, the main two there, main two programs for him. And he's not sure yet if he's close to getting to that decision. So still some time left in July if that is indeed the projected timeline. That's kind of what he's been thinking, but he's not sure that he's there yet. So kind of status quo for those guys. I think since we're talking about Stewart, the cookout at USC July 28th, keep an eye out on that. Possible that Dylan Stewart could be back in town for that. I don't think that's fully locked in, but it is possible. And he's another guy that's been looking at a possible end of July decision. Could stretch into August, could even stretch later. I don't think he's going to carry it until December or anything. I wouldn't think so. But another one to watch out for. And then Paylor, as you mentioned there at the end. Plenty of other prospects still on the board too. I mean, here's one we don't talk about enough, Wes. Liam Andrews, big-time two-way lineman out of Boston, Massachusetts. Penn State, South Carolina thought to be the finalists there. Our friends over at BWI at Penn State are hearing that he may decide this week. Liam Andrews himself told us that he wanted to decide this month. And so that's one to watch too. I think if you absolutely had to handicap it. Maybe you say Penn State, but I think it's quite close. And some folks that I've talked to think it's kind of a toss-up, a coin flip, more 50-50. So still plenty of other guys on the board as well. But obviously, Dylan Stewart, Jalewis Solomon, Hill, Paylor, those guys have been taking up Keelan Adams, they've been taking up the lion's share of the attention, but there's other good prospects, remaining on the board as well.
Yeah, man. So we'll certainly continue to track that on Gamecock Central. And I always think it's interesting when you hear stuff right after an OV, if that decision comes pretty quickly after that, I think we always feel pretty darn good about our information. Like if we're hearing, hey, this guy's going to end up at South Carolina, and then they decide within the next week or two, generally it's pretty accurate. I think the further away you get from when that guy's been on campus, the more sort of in the dark, in the shadows we all are. And I think the coaching staff is kind of the same way, because you're sitting there like, all right, feel good about Daniel Hill, but come on, Daniel. Let's go, let's make this thing official. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But hey, speaking of that cookout, there's going to be some guys to track there, man. Can you imagine if you're South Carolina, you're making that push going into that date? All the committed guys that can possibly make it in will be there. But you're going to be making that push. Can you get Dylan down one more time before he decides? Can you get Solomon in town? Does Daniel Hill make a surprise appearance? Like, these final guys, that happens to also be the tentative date for Jonathan Paylor to actually make his announcement. So, you're going to have a lot going on. Travis asking, is David Sanders going to be there? Don't know right now. I'm sure he's got an invitation in the mail. I promise you that. So I promise you there'll be a big push to try to get Elijah Griffin back. There were a couple of potential dates for him to come in late June that did not happen. So there'll be a big push there. So I think that's going to be something incredibly interesting to track going into right before we sort of dial in on, hey, it's football season, preseason. Let's talk team as opposed to recruiting. Speaking of team, we're going to talk about the South Carolina quarterback position here in a second. But, Chris, we got a new sponsor to tell everybody about.
Yep.
And they're coming in hot, man. So, I guess drum roll, please. Do you want to take this or am I taking this? So, our new friends, and I'm sure y'all have heard of them, but they're sponsoring several of the various On3 Network podcasts. And so we want to officially welcome Birddog into the Gamecock Central podcast family. And Chris is rocking his koozie there. And man, these guys have hooked us up with some pretty nice swag, you would say.
Dude, these things are absolutely outstanding. So I've got them on right now.
So I'm gonna hold them up, Chris.
Yeah.
And so these are the Birddogs shorts. Why don't you describe what you're working with, and I'll hold up the shorts. This is not the easiest way to do this, but
it is not.
The people listening are like, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah. No, so Birddogs, they're actually shorts and pants, Wes, but they're not just your regular shorts and pants. They make you look good. So with the shorts, which is what I'm wearing right now and what you're holding up there on camera, they're the stretch khaki shorts. They're designed to fit slimmer through your thigh and your leg. They give a more sculpted look. They actually do the same thing, Wes, as Lululemon, but they fit way better. You may be going, oh, that's a pretty tall statement. Check them out for yourself, though. They fit way better than regular shorts. You put on, Wes, like a pair of khaki shorts, and they're all stiff. They're all restrictive. Birddogs fixed this issue because they actually invented a fabric, which is awesome. A cloud knit fabric. It looks just like khaki, but it stretches so you get a slimmer fit. Don't have to sacrifice any movement. You're free to move about. Don't feel so restricted. And they also use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric. Keeps you cool and dry all day long, Wes, which is pretty key right now. you think about wearing like a regular pair of khakis, man, they're all stiff and they're super hot. These are not. Leave you wide open. And then also you do not have to worry about being super sweaty. Wes showed you the shorts down there. They've also got pants, and go check them out for yourself at birddogs.com. Here's the other thing, Wes. Right now, this really cool 20-ounce tumbler that I have that I've been drinking out of for the entire weekend, you can actually get one of these free. If you go to birddogs.com/Gamecocks, or you can just order your Bird Dogs at birddogs.com, put in the promo code Gamecocks at checkout. You can get a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. So get yourself some super cool shorts and pants from Bird Dogs. And then you can also get, for a limited time, promo code Gamecocks, a free Yeti tumbler with your order.
Yeah. Can you hold that tumbler up again, Chris?
Yep. Let's get the big view here. This thing's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Bird Dogs. Check them out. Birddogs.com. And the cool thing about the shorts is basically I would describe it like they're khaki shorts for everybody else that's seeing you when you need to dress in khaki shorts. But the inside is like wearing gym shorts. So it's just very, very, very comfortable, very casual. So
built-in liner. They're awesome. They really are.
Yep. So you'll continue to hear us talk about Bird Dogs a bit over the next month. All right, dude, let's talk quarterbacks. We've been teasing it all show, and obviously the headliner here, Spencer Rattler, returning starter. You know, this time last year it was kind of funny, like Rattler hadn't been announced yet as the starter, but we all sort of knew, all sort of assumed he would be the guy. 1 year later, he's back, and we've talked about a lot of this all offseason, man, but let's do it like this. What do you think is the single biggest key to Spencer Rattler kind of taking his game to the next level in 2023 and rising back up those draft boards?
I think if you had to boil it down to a word, it's consistency, I think. And so for me, a big part of that consistency is just eliminating some of the mistakes, you know, that reared their ugly head last year. And that was not just Spencer Rattler, right? That was the entire team. I mean, the Florida game's a great example, right? You go down there and fumble the ball away a bunch. You know, there's going to be a lot of other storylines, running the football, running back position. There's going to be protection questions coming into this season, particularly with Jalen Nichols being out. But if we're just talking individual play, I think for Rattler, it's just taking care of the football, being more consistent, and then turning some of the plays that were negative plays into just, hey, maybe this is a throwaway. Maybe a couple of these potential highlight reel plays that were just near hits last year, near misses, however you want to classify it. Maybe those turn into big plays this season. So we certainly saw flashes of it. I mean, you think about even in the Clemson game, Wes, right? That was a great kind of microcosm of exactly what we're talking about. You go from a 4th and 1 bomb to Juju McDowell, just as pretty a pass as you'll ever see. And then right after that, an interception into the end zone, right? And Rattler played a pick 6 in that game, right? But then you had the throw to Antoine Juice Wells that was for the touchdown. That was an incredible throw. So I think it's just taking some of those negative plays out of the equation, then becoming more consistent. I feel like Spencer, again, has taken that leadership step in year 2. We know he loves the Dowell Loggins offense. I think that Dowell Loggins is going to let Spencer Rattler play to his strengths a little bit more with the style that he wants to play and open that world up for him creatively. But just being more consistent is what I'd boil it down to.
Chris, my favorite thing about the way Rattler played down the stretch was he had an ability, even if he made a mistake or had a miss, and even if it was a big mistake like in Clemson, he found a way to just keep playing with confidence. And, you know, in some way, I think I'll even take that Rattler over a lot of guys, because how many quarterbacks, how many human beings, like if you're playing a sport and you make a couple mistakes, it is very difficult not to just sort of go into your shell a little bit, kind of start being a little more conservative. Maybe you work against yourself. Maybe you short arm a pass a little bit because you're thinking about it too much. Rattler was borderline perfect against Tennessee, but going into Clemson, he sort of used that as a springboard to where even when he made mistakes, I thought he looked just infinitely more confident than DJU. And DJU had not made those sort of normally killer mistakes. And Rattler was the by far more confident quarterback with the way he played as that game progressed. So I think, to your point, man, yes, cut down on a few of those, but if he's going to give you a chance, if South Carolina sees the guy that was at quarterback, mistakes or not, against Tennessee, Clemson, and Notre Dame, because I felt like the whole team just sort of fed off of that. And so for me, I think it's just continuing to try to channel that. If you're Dow Loggins, not to make this about the offense and the offensive scheme, but obviously these two things go hand in hand. They are going to be tied together. And I think for Loggins, you have to kind of fight that urge that every play caller has to want to do too much. And, we even heard him. I thought Loggins was very open, very honest, very forthcoming during, spring ball. We're trying to figure out what we do incredibly well. How much do we bring in from Oklahoma? How much do we bring in from what was going on in Arkansas? And, I think that was something with Satterfield. He was never quite able until the very end to just say, look, I don't have to carry all this massive playbook into a game week. So for me, I think Rattler's play is going to be directly tied into sort of fighting that urge as a coach to want to show off all the different things you can do and just kind of let Spencer go play. And I really liked the talk from Dow Loggins about sort of letting Rattler kind of build this offense himself. I think he used the word kind of wanted to let him paint this offense and sort of let it become what he wants it to be. And I think that's a really good sign. And I think that how well the two of them are able to mesh and sort of be on the same page is, to me, the critical piece going into this season in terms of his play among all the other little tiny variables that obviously are going to play into that as well.
Yeah, that cannot be overstated. I think just the relationship between those two, how they work together. Dow Loggins, I think Wes referred to it as a partnership between, the quarterback and the offensive coordinator, and just giving Spencer some stock and equity in what they're doing. And a big part of that is just going to be doing things that Spencer Rattler's comfortable with. At some point, you do have to ask your quarterback, hey, we need to call this in this situation. We need to go execute it. And that's the case for a quarterback or any player. But doing things that your players are comfortable with is smart. That's good coaching, right? You teach them to do the things that they're not as comfortable with, but what they're really good at, you need to lean into and hone in on that. We know that Spencer likes to play up tempo a good bit. We know that he doesn't like huddling and calling plays off a wristband as much. It doesn't look like that's as much of his style. And so I think stylistically we'll see some changes there too. And for Loggins, you're right. I mean, whether it's Spencer or the rest of the offense, just doing things they do well, not doing too much, especially when you have a guy like Spencer Rattler, it can carry a lot of appeal to think, okay, well, we can dial this up because he can make any throw. And that's something you can use to your advantage, right? He can make some of those special plays for you, but it can also work against you if you do too much. So I think with that partnership, it's going to benefit, I think, both, and I think it's going to really help Spencer Rattler.
Big Red weighing in saying, will Joyner be more of a running back or we see him in a backup quarterback role? Tell me it's going to be more of a Wildcat package quarterback if that's the case. We'll talk. Obviously, we'll do a full-on running back preview at some point. But, I mean, I think, Chris, the writing is kind of on the wall here. I don't know. We kind of joked about this with Carry on his Garnet Trust appearance. Like, will you be a running back as far as your official South Carolina bio goes? Will you be in the program as a running back? I don't know if it'll be that official of a change, but it certainly seems like, especially without the addition of an incoming transfer portal running back, by all intents and purposes, Joyner is a running back at this point. That's kind of what I'm considering him anyway, until we're sort of told that it's not trending that way. And, so I think as far as that goes, that does open the door potentially for this Lenoris Sellers as a change of pace quarterback idea. Chris, that's something I've been pushing or talking about for quite some time now. And as we get closer, I wonder if that's something we see implemented, because certainly it feels like that would make a lot of sense.
It would make a ton of sense to me, because you're taking a guy that, Wes, when it was 3rd and short, and I know it's high school, but still, he has translatable traits in that he has the size, the speed, the physicality, the balance as a runner to think that this could translate to college. At South Florence, 3rd and short, he was pretty much as automatic as you could get, as close to automatic as you could get running the football, whether it was getting a foot, a yard, or breaking off a longer run. And then you look at the traits he has, and you look at the questions that South Carolina has at running back. When you're in 3rd and 1, do you feel better about lining up under center and handing it to a running back, or do you feel better about putting Lenora Sellers back there, maybe with a running back, and making the defense think about that aspect of it, and having a big, 6'3", 240-pounder who can really run and physical and has all that balance, letting him get the job done? I think I know which direction I would go right now. So you were on this early, man, that the kind of Tim Tebow as a freshman role. Lenora Sellers has a huge upside. I mean, all indications are this guy's the quarterback of the future sooner than later. But I think that's actually just kind of speaks to his talent level, and that he could be too good to keep off the field in year one, even with an established starter. So find a role, find something he could do. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and he's just a different skill set, I feel like, than anybody else on the roster. So that gives you something to work with there. Obviously, we know there are going to be some questions until there aren't about that running back spot. So, like you said, man, if it's 3rd and 1, I'm wanting to give defenses something to think about. I want them processing a little bit, as opposed to just saying, hey, our front can block better than you can get off blocks, and our running back can make a guy miss if they have to. I'm wanting to sort of slow that defense's pursuit just a little bit to try to give myself a little bit of an edge. I mean, Chris, there's certainly the potential. You could see Joyner and Sellers in the backfield at the same time. And there'd be a lot of fun stuff you can do with that, I think. And to me, Joyner's use down the stretch last year was some of the most creative stuff we saw from that offensive staff, sort of just getting him involved in multiple ways. So I think there are some things you can do with both those guys that get them involved. We know Luedecke will be involved some in the running game. We know it appears that Cam Sandlin may get a shot in the running game. So, there are some options for South Carolina there, but all of that stuff kind of goes back to your quarterback position too. And for Rattler to have the year he wants, you're going to have to find a way to keep the chains moving and to obviously keep opponents to where they have to stop the run. They have to show they can stop the run as well. So, I mean, depth chart wise, I think it'll be very interesting to see how they would list this thing. We know depth charts don't exist anymore, but they do. And I think going into it, Chris, if there were a depth chart that was public, it's obviously Rattler 1. It's still Doty 2. And I think people got way too caught up in a handful of throws in a spring game, talking about Doty, that, he, in my opinion, is still your backup quarterback. Now, Lenoris can be your change of pace guy without being your true backup quarterback as a true freshman right off the bat. Then I think the question becomes, all right, what's next? The indications I would take from the spring game is that that's sort of where Tanner Bailey kind of gets into the mix. But I think as far as pure depth chart going into preseason camp, if you're Sellers and if you're Tanner Bailey, you're sort of looking at fighting out for that third spot, with Sellers being the guy that kind of has the upside to even maybe potentially push for second.
I think it's so dependent when you're thinking about the depth chart on the situation, when it is in the season. You can make up a variety of scenarios and maybe come up with different answers, Wes. I mean, let's say that Spencer Rattler is not playing in game 2 for whatever reason. He's injured, suspended, whatever. And now you need a starter. Is Lenore Sellers or Tanner Bailey or somebody else trotting out there as your number one quarterback in game 2? I tend to think, like you, would be Luke Doty, right? But then are you more inclined, given that you don't have your full-time, your regular starter, are you more inclined to play Lenore Sellers even more? Maybe so. And then if you play him and he performs very well, does that give you an impetus to say, maybe this guy should be playing like all the time? Maybe. So I think it just depends on your situations. And it's entirely possible that we go through the year, Spencer Rattler's the starter every game. This is the scenario I would pick right now. But let's say he's the starter every game. Lenore Sellers plays some as a change of pace guy, has success, has a good year one, more of a running / change of pace option. And then behind the scenes, the staff would have put Doty in as quarterback too, if needed. He would have been the backup, but we never really know that. Does that make sense? Because the scenario never presented itself. That's possible too. So, Sellers is somebody that you need to see play, and you need to have preseason camp to see how does Tanner Bailey perform. How does he stack up with Doty? How does Sellers stack up with those other two guys that have been around a little bit longer? There's still lots of questions to be answered. And I don't know if you can give it the depth chart treatment of here's the number one guy, here's number 2, here's number 3, because it's not that simple of a situation.
Yeah, you almost would have to, and people don't do this with depth charts, but you almost, I think, would have to split it into 2 positions and say, this is quarterback, and then kind of change of pace quarterback. Tebow position is this guy. And we've seen that to an extent already. You just don't present it that way on a depth chart. I think we saw that last year. Obviously, Doty was backup quarterback, but Joyner was change of pace quarterback. So, that's just kind of how in college football, especially, there's not always a perfect way to like represent it within your traditional confines of your depth chart. But the reality, is that. So, let's see. Anything else with quarterback that needs to be hit?
I don't think so in terms of current roster. No.
Obviously, Reno, your guy for 24. Still a lot to find out, I think, for 25.
Yep. Few offers out.
Yeah. How about Jaden Bradford to Liberty?
I love the fit. Great pickup for Liberty. And I think he'll do really well in that offense with Jamie Chadwell too. So that was just a great fit, I thought.
Yeah, I think he's going to tear it up there. Made a lot of sense all the way around, I think, in terms of a spot he's going to be able to go play and be a perfect fit. And Chadwell obviously is a dude that can put together a really unique offense. And We'll see where that goes, but I think will be fun to sort of pay attention to that. Travis says, no, he does not want South Carolina to take a quarterback for 25. I normally agree with you on things, Travis, but I take a quarterback every year.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, well, they're going to, unless something happens where you strike out on a bunch and don't feel like you need to reach on a guy. But they're going to take a quarterback in 25. Yeah, I'm with you. You generally take one every year and kind of let the chips fall where they may. They have some offers out to some good ones. Deuce Knight's one out of Mississippi. Ryan Montgomery is another one that will very likely be on campus this season for a game out of Ohio. So there are a few guys out there, but yeah, I agree. I think you take one every class in almost all cases.
By the way, so while we were here on air, Chris, another Gamecock off the board. Will Sanders. Let's see. Where'd it go? All right, Cubs, number 113 overall pick, 4th round. Slot value for that pick, signing bonus is almost $600,000. So congrats to Will. Obviously did not quite have the year that I think he wanted to have and expected to have and was hoping to have, but still that big frame and that projectability carries him. And really, honestly, it's easy, Chris, to sort of look at what happened in his final year. You go back and look at his career numbers, though, at South Carolina, still an incredibly productive guy for them and someone who, pitched from pretty much the second he stepped on campus and was a contributor. So hopefully Will can sort of work through some tweaks. I always listen to a podcast on The Athletic with Erica Flaherty and Dave O'Brien. And he always talks about if you make it that far, especially if you make it to the big leagues, everybody's one little tweak either in the right direction or the wrong direction from being a 10-year vet or from being a guy who never gets to play in the league again. So hopefully for Will, he can kind of hone in on whatever it was this past season and tweak that and get to where he needs to be. But hey, speaks to the talent of those guys, man. Mahoney, 3rd round, and Will Sanders, 4th round.
Yeah, and big-time talents, both those guys. I think Will Sanders was, remember a while back, Wes, even as a freshman when he kind of stormed onto the scene, God, he was this big guy throwing these fastballs, and he had a lot of first-round buzz, probably still even coming into this season, Wes, had some first-round buzz. Mahoney, I think, flew under the radar a little bit more, like around Columbia. We all knew how good he was. He still had pro buzz, maybe a little bit higher than I thought. I don't follow that angle as closely as like our friend Colin Taylor at Gamecock Central does. But Mahoney's thought of as someone who may be able to move into the bullpen and just be a super aggressive reliever coming out. But both those guys have good stuff, really good makeups, great competitors. So good for them. Happy for them. Wishing them all the best as they move towards their pro career.
Certainly, man. All right, y'all. I think that's going to do it. We'll pick another position next time. And as we roll closer to the season, be on the lookout. We certainly plan to ramp up the podcast and GC Live production. Of course, we'll still be doing our hour on 107.5, but no shortage of things to talk about on there or on here. So be on the lookout for that. And Chris, we'll talk to you soon. Okay, man?
Talk to y'all soon.
All right. See y'all.